So we continue this week in the season of Epiphany, which derives from the Greek word epipheia, meaning manifestation. We began last week with the three magi who come from a land far away to witness the manifestation of God in the baby Jesus, the long-awaited King, and indeed the child of Mary and Joseph. And throughout the season of Epiphany, we will move through many key scenes of Jesus' life, which are each in differing ways a manifestation of the God who comes both as the human one, Jesus, and as the Christ, the reconciler of the whole cosmos. And when this God is made manifest in our midst, friends, often unexpectedly, we find we are filled with joy. Joy is essential to our faith, and it has been central to my own life as a Christian. Just 16 years old, a child of the church, I rode 11 and a half hours in a van to St. Louis, Missouri, gathering in a stadium filled with 22,000 other high school youth. And on the second night there, our speaker stepped up, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, now of blessed memory, having died in Christ just days ago, and spoke. I recall the cool air circulating through the packed stadium, meeting the sweat of my brow from the heat of that July sun we had walked through outside in the downtown core. I recall the hush that fell quickly over the crowd as this voice boomed out from the speakers. I recall thinking how short he was. Google confirms he was just 5'3", yet speaking with a fierce energy and an overwhelming joy. I heard stories of human violence and pain and injustice, the likes of which this privileged white boy had never before encountered. Yet I heard someone bear witness to God's love with a joy that lit up that entire stadium. And perhaps more than anything else, I recall his laughter, a generous and expansive laugh, unexpectedly high-pitched, drawing bouts of laughter from across the crowd. I was transformed by his invitation to give our whole lives to God, by his insistence that God has created each of us unique, that God sees us and knows us and loves us and delights in us. And as his talk ended, the music began. A friend and I ran up to the top of the stadium with our church's video camera, wanting to kind of get a 360-degree pan of this moment. And halfway through running, I had to stop and brace myself. For running fast though I was, joy had caught up with me. Right there in the dark, the cool air, the sounds of the voices singing, I can tell you, friends, joy overwhelmed me. God's grace was manifest, and inexplicably tears fell from my face, and as our friends might say, my heart was strangely warmed. Robert Farrar Capon writes, "Grace is the celebration of life, relentlessly hounding all non-celebrants in the world. It is the floating cosmic bash shouting its way through the streets of the universe, flinging the sweetness of its cessations to every window, pounding at every door in a hilarity beyond all liking and happening." Want to know what the life of God is about, what the life of Jesus is about? It is a feast of joy. As the Orthodox theologian Alexander Schmemann writes, the image of the banquet, the feast, remains throughout the whole Bible the central image of life, the image of life at its creation and of life at its end and fulfillment, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. When God is manifest, friends, it is a feast of joy. And we're going to get glimpses of that throughout this season of Epiphany. We find ourselves first walking alongside those magi, those responding to the mystery that Bruce Coburn sang about and which Megan drew us deeper into last week. Those who hear the subtle voice of God speaking often in the silence, stirring and bidding them to go they know not where. But what sustained them was when they arrived, when they saw the star had stopped, their joy we read, was exuberant. And so today, in his first public act in the Gospel of John, Jesus appears at a wedding, a 7-day event in the ancient world, and prompted by his mom, performs what is regarded by John as the first sign or manifestation of Jesus' ministry. We're in an altogether different world in the Gospel of John than in the other 3 Gospels. John is part poet, part philosopher, part storyteller. He lives inside of a kind of mystical world where all is supercharged with meaning. Each scene crafted with care to describe the meaning of Jesus' life in terms of God made manifest. At the end of this story, we heard Marilyn read, Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed him. The glory of God is made manifest through these 7 signs, this being the first, and they go on to include healings and feedings and the raising of Lazarus to life. Each manifests the goodness of God, meeting us in our brokenness, and again, filling us with a joy we cannot explain. Our story begins on the 3rd day. There was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. We should stop right there as good readers of texts to ponder the phrases with care. What is the meaning of the 3rd day? Where else do we hear it? Well, we proclaim it every week in the Creed. On the 3rd day, he rose again. John, the literary architect, situates this story on the 3rd day, making this, friends, a resurrection story, drawing a link between the events of this wedding and those of Jesus' own resurrection, and the promise of a banquet that is yet to come. John intends to show that this encounter isn't just a one-time event. Some people gathered and ran out of wine. No, this is a manifestation of God's feast of joy that has happened, that is happening, and that will one day happen. Jesus was with his family and disciples in Cana at a wedding feast, and his mother gives him the news no one wants to hear. They've run out of wine. The narrator describes the scene. Standing there, 6 stone jars for the Judean rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Consider this image, 6 stone jars empty of water for the Jerusalem temple rites of purification. But as Sue Ferguson Johnson and Wes Howard Brook note, these have run dry. They've lost the ability to lead people into a joyous celebration. And the simple word of Jesus, fill the jars with water, provides the antidote. And fill them they do, holding 180 gallons, which Jesus transforms into the equivalent of roughly 900 bottles of the best vino the attendant of the feast, think of this like an ancient wedding planner, had ever tasted. To wine, what Robert Farrar Capon calls water come of age. Now let me say, we all know, I think, that raucous parties and excessive wine and dancing can be a source of great joy and just as likely a cause of pain. I'm sure you've been at a wedding in which someone had too much to drink. We all have friends and family who are in recovery. We know dear ones we have lost, perhaps, to disease, to addiction. We all have our own struggles. And so we need to tend carefully with this. But knowing all that, as the ancient world knew as well, makes Jesus' image all the more compelling and curious. Cana was well known as the site of the worship of Dionysus, Bacchus, the Greek-Roman god of wine and celebration. And worship in that Greco-Roman context was marked by a total disinhibiting of behavior that flowed from an abundance of wine. Hardly the point of Jesus' story. So what then is this about? Well, again, Sue Ferguson Johnson and Wes Howard Brook continue the difference they suggest between the Dionysian and the Jesus-centered celebration is found in what the wedding imagery adds to the wine imagery. For worshippers of Dionysius, wine offered a passionate abandon of drunken sex. For Jesus' disciples, abundant wine expresses the now long fulfilled hope for the pure passion of life with others and life with God. In other words, God's original purpose, they write, for human life on earth is being restored, to live with passionate joy and celebration, while abiding in God and indeed through the Word made flesh in Jesus. Thus, this is a great epiphany, a manifestation of God, the passion, the joy, the feast, complete with the human one, the bridegroom, Jesus, and 900 bottles of the best wine you've ever tasted. But there's more. There's more, because the Christian tradition insists you and I, friends, are welcomed at that feast not just as one more awkward attendee searching for our name on the seating chart. No, we are welcomed into that feast by the very bridegroom, beckoned not just to partake of the celebrations, but in fact to walk down the aisle. For you and I are being drawn into that mystic sweet communion, that life with God, a life of ecstatic joy and deep passionate love, which takes hold of you and will not let you go. And friends, you are bidden and welcome to this feast, no matter your history, your pain, your trauma, no matter your gender or your sexual orientation, no matter how beautiful or painful your own human relationships have been, that feast is for you. Our reading from the Song of Songs offers us some glimpses into just some of the depth of longing and love exemplified in God's yearning for us, but often made manifest, however imperfectly, in human relationships. For I can't describe this vision of joy without noting that it is indeed often fleeting, and how much the world and its machinations seem to work against it. This was the case for those who encountered Jesus in each of the great signs. Life does carry on. Humans continue to fight for wealth or for power, and yet, in the midst of all that, we sit with this lingering sense of joy that we cannot shake. After hearing Bishop Tutu speak, of course, I climbed in a van and drove 11 and a half hours home, and in many ways, life continued the same, and yet here I am 20 years later, and I can close my eyes and describe that moment, among many others. As Desmond Tutu wrote, we are fragile creatures, and it is from our weakness, not despite it, that we discover the possibility of pure joy. With all of our weakness and fragility, friends, the miracle of God manifest is that we can actually taste the feast that is to come, that is here already in small ways, and that holds us. Mary Oliver is one of my favorite writers on joy. Hear this piece of hers. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give in to it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back. That sometimes something happens better than all the riches or power in the world. It could be anything. Very likely, you notice it in the instant when love begins. That's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty, for joy is not made to be a crumb. Joy is not made to be a crumb, my friends. It is a wedding feast with the finest wine that you've ever had, and pastries and pies and dancing and laughter and love-making and much more. It is a joy that strikes you deep to the core, claiming you are seen and you are known and you are loved. And we who have tasted this joy do the only thing that we possibly could do. We offer it back to one another in gratitude. We resist reducing the world and its many creatures into objects to be ruled over, for we see we indeed are lovers in a dangerous time. As Megan urged us last week, we open ourselves to wonder. We practice enchantment. We approach our lives with a curiosity that befits the joy we have known, especially when that is tried by our current circumstance, as I know it is for so many of us now. For friends, we are like the stewards at that feast, told to dip down into those great buckets of wash water, and we are surprised to find we draw up a wine of unexpected goodness. That is grace at work. That is the one-way love of God that claims us and draws us deep into the life of joy. We never know when the voice of Jesus will catch us or those near to us, but friends, we do know this. We put our hope in this, that God has gripped us and holds us and has come for us, beckoning to the feast to come. And if we listen, if we quiet ourselves and listen close, we might just hear the faint sounds of Brother Desmond Tutu's laughter even now. May it be so, my friends. Amen.